Well, good evening. Tonight, the scandal surrounding Channel 9 deepens, with shocking allegations that the company betrayed the confidence of a high-profile female presenter when she raised concerns about sacked news boss Darren Wick. The on-air star was horrified to discover that soon after discussing her concerns through the appropriate channels at 9, her confidence was breached almost immediately when the top news exec was told about the complaint against him. Our latest revelation about the toxic culture and the mishandling of serious complaints comes as I can also reveal tonight that the chief executive of 9 planned a staff conference where there would have been a humiliating ice bath challenge. Senior women were horrified that they were being asked to strip down to their swimwear and jump into freezing water in front of colleagues. The plan was later abandoned. It's also emerged that Wick had multiple consensual relationships with women working for him, as well as being accused of sexually harassing others. According to a senior company figure who spoke to me because they're so concerned about events at 9, a famous presenter went to the People and Culture Department to confide in them about Wick and his toxic management style. Wick was her direct boss, yet he refused to speak to her or respond to emails, texts or calls. The woman requested that HR deal with her initial conversation in strict confidence, as she hadn't yet decided whether to formalise her complaint against Wick, the most powerful man in the news division. Yet her concerns were immediately conveyed to Wick and her identity was also revealed. Now, the senior 9 figure, who is familiar with the events that unfolded, told me that the woman was horrified that her conversation hadn't been kept confidential and that her trust had been breached. This is now the third 9 employee known to have raised concerns formally about Wick. The first is the woman whose complaint led to his departure this year. The second is the woman we raised here last night, who had raised the toxic culture at 9 with a board director, and now this presenter is the third. Now, we're not accusing HR staff of telling Wick themselves, only that the supposedly confidential process at 9 failed. The loss of confidence in the HR department has been raised in the past week amid concerns that women don't feel safe to raise complaints about their superiors. And these concerns fed into the email by Channel 9 Chief Executive Mike Sneesby to staff on Wednesday when he gave assurances that the HR process was confidential. He said in the email, if you raise an issue, including making a complaint, our processes are designed to ensure the confidentiality and protection for the individual, as well as the confidentiality of the person who the complaint is directed at. He said this is critical, no matter what level you are in our business, to ensure you feel safe to make a complaint and know that it will be handled seriously and discreetly. In the email, he also said that making complaints about inappropriate conduct wouldn't be career damaging. Now, I can report that Sneesby is understood to have broken his working holiday in Los Angeles to fly home to deal with this crisis. He didn't respond to my questions or calls today. My questions were about why Wick, who had a complaint of inappropriate behaviour levelled at him, was allowed back in the office for at least 6 hours on April 24th, and whether this was a failure to protect employees and to provide them with a safe working environment. It's also understood that Wick was given a large payout. Now, I do know I have confirmed the identity of the woman who made the complaint against Wick that led to his departure, and of course, we will keep this confidential, along with all other details about her. But my understanding is she hasn't received any compensation as yet, while Wick has received a large payout, and her matter against the company is understood to be ongoing. It's not yet clear at all whether the claim she's made against Wick will or won't affect her career. And why Wick was allowed back in the office was a question that one female employee at 9 asked when corporate affairs boss Victoria Buchan, HR boss Vanessa Morley and TV executive Michael Healy addressed all staff at 3 o'clock yesterday. Well, they were told that it was so he could return his equipment and collect his belongings. Now, Sky News has learned of a culture under Darren Wick where he refused to engage with some staff, which was seen by them as a tactic to keep reporters, often women, on edge, while he forged extremely close bonds with others. So close, in fact, that Wick had multiple consensual relationships with either direct reports or junior employees in the newsroom. One of his relationships was with a 9 News reporter and another with a producer who was promoted to an interstate role. This created an unhealthy environment amid allegations of favouritism. There's now deep unrest at 9 this week as women debate whether or not to come forward to HR with their experiences of harassment while they worked at one of the country's biggest TV networks. Even before our revelations this week about Wick's history of alleged inappropriate behaviour, company morale was low. Confidential sources tell me that the recent staff engagement survey across the entire 9 group recorded scores in the low 60s, reflecting both on the culture at the company and Mike Sneesby's own leadership. Senior women were also appalled by the plan to hold a staff conference in Bowral around 18 months ago that would feature an ice bath challenge. It would have subjected some of the company's most senior female employees to a humiliating public viewing in their swimwear in freezing temperatures. Now, our revelations tonight come after a 9 Network star told me in an emotional interview yesterday that Wick had groped her and breathed heavily down her neck at the Logies after party in 2019. She said he had his hands everywhere and she had to peel him off her. She said she might have kicked or pushed him if he was any other man, but he was her boss. She also expressed concerns held by multiple 9 female employees about the head of communications, Victoria Buchan. She said that while Buchan's job has nothing to do with HR, it did involve working, and it does involve working with talent, including young women. And the star said she would brush aside any suggestion of inappropriate behaviour, saying, "That's just Wiki." But the presenter's most damning remarks were for the board member who ignored her concerns about the toxic culture at 9. She said there was no assistance provided by the network to source the leaks, stamp out the toxic behaviour or change the culture. She said after board level, there's nowhere to go and I was fearful of losing my job. 9 newspapers and television thus far have failed to report on this scandal that the network is facing. But Ray Hadley, who is so senior he's untouchable, today said that the bad behaviour has to stop, and he even offered to intervene and support women who had experienced issues.
No young woman in any workplace, whether it's 9 Radio, 9 Entertainment generally, should have to put up with unwanted advances. No woman who reports such behaviour should not expect, of course, to be facing recriminations. And if you wished me to become involved, I'm happy privately to become involved, not publicly, privately. I'm available. A couple of young women have already reached out to me, and I'm happy to not give you advice, but just direct you to where you should go. The lines have been drawn in the sand. The CEO, Mike Sneesby, has laid the ground rules. So be assured any complaint about this sort of behaviour will be dealt with promptly and discreetly, particularly if that's how you want it handled. And don't think this is simply the domain of 9 Entertainment. It's happened and probably still happening in other workplaces, and I'll tell you one thing, it's bloody well got to stop.
Strong remarks there from Ray Hadley. Now, 9 finally announced Wick's replacement today after months. In former Current Affairs boss Fiona Deer, she appealed to staff to support her in the role in a video leaked to us.
To the news leadership team that I've been a part of for the last, I don't know how long, I can't really think today. I need all of you guys so badly. So can we please do it together? I want to do this together. This is not a captain's thing. We've got to do this together.
Now, I'm going to talk about this with my panel in a moment, but also tonight, yet another bungle. Immigration Minister Andrew Giles once again refuses to resign after a released detainee was charged with murder. Also tonight, the harrowing new footage that exposes Hamas's atrocities against young women. It's distressing, but timely, given the comparisons being made completely wrongly between Israel and these terrorists. Former British Commander Richard Kemp will join me live in studio. He's in Australia to discuss this. Meanwhile, the Prime Minister finally fronts the media only to deflect blame after refusing to defend Israel against the ICC's disgraceful charges. But now let's bring in tonight's panel. Sky News host Steve Price and Perth Mayor Basil Zemplis. Welcome to you both. Steve, look, let's first touch on this Nine scandal that we've been reporting on and breaking news of every single day this week. Do you think it's surprising that Nine hasn't been reporting about this topic in the papers or on TV, despite going so hard against their commercial rival Channel 7's Spotlight program when they were being exposed for allegations of poor behaviour?
Of course. I mean, your story today was page one of the Herald Sun in Melbourne, but I listened to much of the morning radio program on 3AW, which Nine owns, not a mention of it at all. And I pat on the back my old mate Ray Hadley for bringing it up on 2GB. Not one word of it in the Age newspaper, not one word of it in the Sydney Morning Herald. Now, those two newspapers in particular, they've always been an odd fit to the Nine corporate feeling in the company, the way that company operates. But you would think, given how strong they are in these matters of the treatment of women, whether it be domestic violence or workplace attitudes toward women, that they may have had the courage today to come out, report your story, back it up, ask questions themselves. But there has been a deafening silence, and that's disgraceful.
Now, Basil, you know, you're Perth Mayor, but you're obviously aligned with the Seven Network. I mean, we saw such a strong campaign of mostly legitimate news reporting from the Sydney Morning Herald, you know, in its news pages, in its gossip columns, but Nine Television as well, Current Affair, all their television programs against Channel 7 when the Spotlight scandal was unfolding. But yet not a word, even though so many women, I mean, we've been reporting every night this week, more women are coming forward with quite serious allegations of inappropriate conduct or sexual harassment that they've experienced at Channel 9.
They're very serious allegations. That's the first thing that needs to be said. And the culture that evidently or apparently has existed is a very poor one. And it is refreshing, I think, to see Ray Hadley take a lead. And perhaps that is the first domino within the group to fall. I'll also say, though, just because one group might choose to report about another in a certain way doesn't mean it has to be reciprocated. And ultimately, these are decisions for the Nine Network and the Nine Group to decide how they're going to report about affairs within their own organisation. They need to make the decision now. How do we want to reflect? How do we want to be portrayed from this point in? And how do we want history to judge we have dealt with these very serious accusations that have been made against one of our executives? I'll also say that as somebody who's been in television and continues in television at around the 30-year mark, just full stop, it doesn't make you feel good as somebody who's been involved in this industry to hear these sorts of allegations. Television today is a very different place to what it was when I first joined 30 years ago and 20 years before that and even 15 or 10 years ago. But it clearly needs to continue to evolve. There's no doubt about that. This behaviour is very, very poor.
Indeed it is. And, you know, when I did that interview yesterday with the female presenter and when I spoke to her yesterday, hearing the emotion, the tears as we spoke, you know, it really brings it home just how much this matters. Now, after growing calls for Australia to perhaps boycott, maybe withdraw from the ICC, that's the International Criminal Court, after its decision this week to issue arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu alongside Hamas, well, once again, Albanese has refused to directly comment on the ICC. Instead, he just shifted the blame, can you believe it, to the Howard government. Have a look.
Which actually was signed up to, of course, not by my government, but by the Howard government when Alexander Downer was the foreign minister. So it's up to them, I think, to explain those decisions at that time. Be very clear about what's happened here. There's been an application. There's been no determination by the ICC against any individual or any body at this point in time.
If they do proceed with arrest warrants, should we withdraw
there
from the
hasn't
ICC?
been, and I don't respond to hypotheticals about court cases that haven't occurred with respect. We also call for, since then, a humanitarian ceasefire.
Steve, can you get a more weak, a worse PM? He won't even rule out that should Netanyahu come to Australia, which obviously he's not going to do, that he wouldn't be arrested. Can the PM get any worse?
Well, it got worse again today. His response today was even more confused. It's weak leadership. And I think the Labor Party has a real problem here. Anthony Albanese is being shown to be a weak man. Now, I looked back for the reason that it was 2 years ago, Tuesday this week, that Anthony Albanese stood in an RSL club in Sydney and claimed the Prime Ministership. I watched the whole speech of him claiming that victory over Scott Morrison back to write a column about it for the Herald Sun this week. And the one thing that he kept going back to was his main focus was going to be, as Prime Minister, Sharri, to bring the country together. His words, not mine. He was accusing Morrison of being divisive, and he said he was going to bring the country together. Now, I've been around a long time, even longer than Basil. I can't remember a time when Australia has been more divided than it is today. I'd have to go all the way back to the early 70s in the Vietnam War to remember a time like that. And I think Anthony Albanese has to step up now and show leadership, or someone in his own party is going to start saying, this bloke doesn't deserve to be the boss.
And, you know, I think you're right. We are seeing this unprecedented level of anti-Semitism. But the issue is, and you know, I've been saying this for a while and it just keeps getting worse, that Albanese is making it worse by refusing to call out the ICC, by refusing to say, no, we can't equate Netanyahu with Hamas. This isn't right. He's making it worse because he's telling everyone, all those protesters, all those students, everyone at home, that actually Israel might be committing war crimes, that it should be arrested, that its PM should be arrested for crimes against humanity and this just fans the flames of anti-Semitism, when in fact the opposite is true. You know, I'm going to go into the detail of that a bit later with Richard Kemp when I interview him. But Basil, what do you think about this? You know, my view, he's making the anti-Semitism crisis worse by not shutting down these falsehoods.
I think Peter Dutton's got it absolutely spot on. He's used very simple language to explain what's happened here with the Prime Minister. He said the Prime Minister has squibbed it. And that is exactly what he has done. He has refused to take any responsibility or even take a position. I mean, that blaming the Howard government, ridiculous. Doesn't matter how we signed up to it or how we became a part of it. The issue for consideration is what is happening right now. And sometimes here in Australia, we look at Joe Biden and wonder about how he became the President of the United States or what sort of a leader he is. But Joe Biden has spoken out against what's happened with the ICC, and incredibly, Anthony Albanese has not. Who is he fearful of? Why won't he take a strong position? Who is he trying to appease with this very wishy-washy view? And again, I say Peter Dutton got it spot on. He's squibbed it here, the Prime Minister. That's not what we want. We want leadership in times like this, and we're not getting it.
Yeah, exactly right. Now, over to the US, and you mentioned Joe Biden. Well, Nikki Haley, who was once Donald Trump's rival, and she only had unkind words to say about him, which is now saying that she will vote for him in November. Have a look.
I put my priorities on a president who's going to have the backs of our allies, and hold our enemies to account, who would secure the border. No more excuses. Trump has not been perfect on these policies. I've made that clear many, many times. But Biden has been a catastrophe.
Steve, I mean, it wasn't overwhelming support for Trump, but, you know, she's going to have to get behind him. She's going to have to be a loyal Republican.
With friends like Nikki Haley, who needs enemies, really. I mean, it was quite a performance. She came out there and said, well, you know, Donald Trump, I don't really like him, but I hate Joe Biden more, and so I'm going to vote for Donald Trump. I mean, it would have been ridiculous if she said something different to that and it was going to support Biden. But all the points she raises about the weakness of Joe Biden are absolutely correct. Donald Trump, obviously going to court every day in New York, got his own problems. He would probably look at Nikki Haley and say, gee, thanks a lot.
Now, just over in your neck of the woods, actually, Steve, opposition leader John Pizzuto reportedly ditched a Liberal Party multicultural dinner on Tuesday night. Well, the claims are that he was told he couldn't make a speech. Now, Basil, apparently we're also hearing that John Pizzuto and Peter Dutton are not having such a good relationship at the moment.
Look, sometimes there is a blue-on behind the scenes because of how people have been treated, what role they've been given, what opportunity to speak, etc., etc. And either side of the argument may well be right. But what really matters, the only thing, in fact, that matters with this stuff behind the scenes or the internal stuff is what the perception of the public is. And the perception of the public when they hear things like this is schoolyard stuff. It reflects very poorly on the individuals and it reflects poorly on the party. And so every consideration, no matter how aggrieved somebody might feel about a situation they've been dealt, they have to make their assessments based on how will this play out in the public.
They hate each other. They can't stand one another.
They might hate each other.
They haven't spoken for months.
Their consideration needs to
haven't
be
spoken for
what damage
months.
are we going to do
Steve,
by expressing that?
I have a question,
please.
Steve. I have a question for you, Steve. Does anyone like John Pizzuto?
No, I don't think his dog even likes him. I mean, seriously, the bloke came out today and said there'll be no nuclear power in Victoria. We don't support nuclear power for Victoria. I mean, goodness gracious. I mean, the Premier, Jacinda Allen, today said it was toxic and we're never going to have it and it's dangerous. What does John Pizzuto, who wants to get elected when the next election is 2 years away, what does he say? Oh, no, we can't have nuclear power here. I mean, the bloke is a dud, and the sooner the Liberal Party in Victoria get rid of him, the better off we'll all be.
Yeah, and look, the worrying thing is
Basil?
that the Liberals could actually have a chance to win the next state election in Victoria, but not if John Pizzuto is the leader. But I don't know if they have any other better options anyway.
I think we were actually saying the same things there, Steve. I mean, he's let it get away from him here. That's the point, isn't it? Doesn't matter how bad he feels about how he's been treated. You can't say this stuff if it brings it out publicly and makes the party look bad. And clearly that's what's happening.
All right, Basil Zemplis, Steve Price.
You'd get elected if you came here. We could make you Premier, Basil.
No, well, he wants to be Premier of WA, I think. Perth now, Premier next.
Victoria needs all the help it can get, I reckon, Steve.
All right.
Correct.
Thank you both so much for your time. Now, coming up, distressing video of the Hamas atrocities against Israel, while Israel recalls ambassadors from 3 countries after they decide to recognise a state of Palestine. Former British commander Richard Kemp will join me live in the studio. Plus, we'll cross to London, where the Conservative government seems to be planning its own demise. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, harrowing footage of 5 Israeli female soldiers being abducted during the October 7 massacre has been released by their families. We're now going to show you just some of the clip, and of course I need to warn you, it's distressing. This video was taken from the body cameras worn by Hamas terrorists. Now, these 5 young women are Israeli soldiers. There are reports from Israel that about 60 soldiers were killed at this particular outpost. The IDF has translated the video, and where you can hear the chilling moment these terrorists discuss the beauty of the women they are holding captive. Have a listen. Now, the families have chosen to release the footage 8 months after October 7, and it is during a time of turmoil for Israel. We've seen the shocking decision by the International Criminal Court to request arrest warrants for Benjamin Netanyahu alongside Hamas, basically drawing an equivalence, a wrong equivalence, between the two. I'm joined now by former British Commander Richard Kemp. Richard, thank you so much for your time. Look, let's start with the ICC decision. Do you think it morally confuses the oppressors with the oppressed, the victims of the October 7 massacre with those who are trying to destroy them?
Yeah, this attempt to arrest Netanyahu and his defence minister is nothing short of an obscenity. It's actually the ICC is the successor to the Nuremberg war tribunals after the Second World War, and it's almost the same as trying to indict Hermann Goering and Heinrich Himmler, but also indict at the same time Winston Churchill and President Truman. It's the same kind of attempt to have moral equivalence between vicious, brutal mass murderers and democracies that are trying to defend their own people.
I mean, can you imagine, you draw the comparison with World War II. Can you imagine if we had the woke left brigade then that we have now, there'd be calls not to go defeat Hitler and the Nazis or to free people from concentration camps because people would say, you're going to cause civilian loss of life.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's tragic. The civilian loss of life in Gaza is a tragedy.
Absolutely.
But it is entirely due to Hamas. If Hamas had not invaded Israel with such barbarity on the 7th of October, then there would be no war in Gaza, there would be no casualties in Gaza, no deaths. It's entirely down to Hamas. And Israel has taken the most extraordinary steps to minimise civilian casualties in Gaza, despite it's the actually opposite of what so many people in the media, in the UN, in the International Criminal Court accuse Israel of.
Well, the ICC prosecutors relied on a panel. The panel was far from impartial. It was stuffed with some Hamas sympathisers. But, they accuse Israel of crimes against humanity, of war crimes. They claim they were targeting civilians. Can you tell us a bit about what the death toll, the civilian death toll figures in Gaza actually show and how they compare with other wars? Yeah,
and the ICC is a political court. It's a kangaroo court, which has no jurisdiction in this case over Israel anyway. But they're nevertheless attempting to seize jurisdiction to prevent Israel from defending its people. And one of the main allegations is civilian casualties. By my calculations, on the figures I've got available at the moment, the civilian to military death ratio is 0.8 to 1. In other words, 0.8, less than one civilian killed for every combatant. Every terrorist. And that is a terrible thing, of course, but this is a terrorist organisation that is fighting, hiding within its civilian population. And Israel, despite all its efforts, has no choice but, unfortunately, to kill civilians while trying to get to Hamas.
And how does that ratio compare?
Yeah, I was going to say, if you compare the 0.8 to 1 ratio that Israel has achieved, if you look at Afghanistan and Iraq, in Afghanistan the ratio was 5 to 1, 5 civilians for every terrorist killed. In Iraq, 3 civilians for every terrorist killed. That's by US forces, a similar level probably from British forces as well. But hugely worse. I mean, those countries did their best to minimise civilian casualties as well. The Israelis have achieved a great deal better than that.
Now, we see the news overnight that Israel is recalling ambassadors in 3 countries that plan to recognise a state of Palestine, even though Hamas is the governing body in Gaza and the Palestinian Authority in the West Bank virtually agrees with the October 7 terror attacks. Yeah. What do you think of this move?
Well, I think Israel is absolutely right to take this action. And what these countries and the United Nations General Assembly, which voted to recognise the so-called state of Palestine, what these countries are doing is they are rewarding terrorism. They are rewarding Hamas, supported by the Palestinian Authority, by the way, on what happened on the 7th of October. It's absolutely despicable, and every country should reject this and certainly not even contemplate recognising a state of Palestine, particularly at this time.
Yeah. Look, you've been in Australia for about 3 weeks now. what's your assessment of the levels of anti-Semitism that we're experiencing here and how it compares to the UK and the US?
Well, I've spoken to many Jewish people in Australia since I came here, including quite a large number of students and university and high school students. And they've told me many stories about the way they feel intimidated, whether it's on the streets, on university campuses or wherever. And basically this is, it's anti-Israel sentiment and anti-Israel action, which is basically the new form of anti-Semitism. It's anti-Semitism in some ways in disguise.
Exactly.
And it's a similar situation that exists in the UK and the US. And actually, if you look below the surface, these people, and I've spoken to students at their what I would call Jew-hate encampment at Sydney University. I've spoken to them. They refuse to condemn Hamas. They can't really explain what they're doing there.
Some of them even support Hamas.
Of course, indeed.
Yeah, they say so openly.
They do. And actually, if you scratch the surface of most of these protesters, they don't really know the cause, but what they do know is that they're opposed to Australia, they're opposed to Britain, they're opposed to the US. These are people who jump on the anti-Israel bandwagon in many cases as a means to undermine and express their displeasure at our society and our values.
Yeah. Look, we hear a lot, from people saying, oh, anti-Zionism is distinguishable from anti-Semitism. And in fact, there's an entire article on the ABC website about this, by the way, even though they haven't covered the anti-Semitism crisis in any meaningful way. But yet, you look at some of the videos that the students put up, the pro-Palestinian students, which I have, and they're chasing Zionists off campus. Well, that is basically chasing Jews, because the majority of Jews support Israel, which is, of course, what Zionism means.
Yeah, anti-Zionism is anti-Semitism. There is no doubt about that. And the reality is that these encampments, these protests, which have accelerated a lot and expanded since the 7th of October, existed in many ways before that. They exist to pressure governments like the Australian government to oppose Israel's defence, oppose Israel's existence. And at the same time, the second reason for their presence is to intimidate Jews, because, of course, Jews are the main supporters of Israel in our countries, and they try and intimidate them out of supporting Israel, and they succeed in many cases.
We have had a lot of support from Christians here too, which has been wonderful. Richard Kemp, it's been terrific to have you and to meet you in person as well. So thank you very much for your time. And of course, your trip is thanks to the Australian Jewish Association. Really appreciate your time.
Thank you, a great pleasure.
Now let's turn to the United Kingdom now, where a very desperate Rishi Sunak has called a snap election for the 4th of July. Have a listen to his pitch.
Only a Conservative government led by me will not put our hard-earned economic stability at risk, can restore pride and confidence in our country, and with a clear plan and bold action will deliver a secure future for you, your family, and our United Kingdom.
British political commentator Emma Webb joins me live now. Emma, thank you very much for your time. Now, this was a very dramatic movement. It was quite unexpected. The PM standing in the rain there, the song "Things Can Only Get Better" playing in the background. This is a huge gamble for Rishi Sunak. So why do you think he's taken it at this particular point in time?
Well, I think it's come as a shock to a lot of people, not just the Labour Party and Reform, who are frankly unprepared for this. The Labour Party don't have their manifesto ready to go. Reform don't even have all of their candidates selected at this point. But it was also an enormous shock to other Conservative MPs. In fact, there was talk overnight of attempts to oust Rishi Sunak in order to stop this election from taking place early. I think originally people thought that it was going to take place in the autumn because it can still be stopped before Parliament is dissolved next Thursday. So this has been an enormous shock to his own MPs, to his own party. There are a number of reasons why he might have chosen to take this decision early. One of them is that inflation is down, which is one of his primary goals. It's down to 2.3%, which is just above the goals of the Bank of England. He's also managed to get through his legislation on Rwanda, which he's now almost using as a kind of threat to say that the planes won't take off unless he is prime minister on the 5th of July, which I think some people think is a bit of a dirty tactic. So there are a number of reasons, including, as you were just speaking about there, this issue with the ICC, that the Labour Party is in complete disarray over Gaza. It's having an enormous impact on our politics here. They lost Oldham Council because of the Muslim vote. We've seen George Galloway being elected again on the Muslim vote over the issue of Gaza. So when we see someone like the Shadow Foreign Secretary David Lammy coming out and standing by the ICCC, this is a big problem for the Labour Party. So it's possible that Rishi Sunak thought that now was as good a time as ever, given that there isn't a great deal that they can do over the summer recess.
Now, Emma, you just outlined some of the reasons he's called the election now, but I understand that also he was concerned about his leadership, which led him to bring forward the election so that he wasn't rolled before a later election if it was called in August. But you just said there that he might now even be ousted as a result of him calling the election. So, you know, it looks like, if I'm reading that correctly, that his leadership was on the line either way.
It's not entirely beyond the realms of possibility. There was some talk overnight, and, you know, even the Telegraph, which is some people jokingly refer to it as the Torygraph. Their headline today was "Things can only get wetter," and him standing in the rain in that kind of pathetic fallacy, getting increasingly soaked over the course of his speech. I think, you know, it's just played into the hands of people who would accuse him of being a bit of a Tory wet. So, you know, it's not completely beyond the realms of possibility. I don't think that it's going to happen. But either way, it's not good for the Conservative Party. If they replace him as leader now, a general election has to happen before the end of the year. So, you know, the chances that would have any positive impact at all on the Conservative Party's prospects are 0 to none. So I don't think that that's necessarily going to happen, but it is possible that he's chosen to call this election now. And, you know, he's a very cautious person. He's not one to take risks. And I think he's had to have his arm twisted by his advisors to make this decision, to make this jump now. And he's obviously done so because he thinks that now is as good a time as any.
Yeah, all right. Emma Webb, thank you very much for your time tonight. Now, coming up, the life of the country's largest coal-fired powered station extended today after years of governments using taxpayer money to force out coal. And the Immigration Minister finally fronts the cameras, only to pin the blame once again elsewhere. Stay tuned. Welcome back. Well, today, New South Wales Premier Chris Minns announced that he'd extend the life of a Rarian coal-fired power station until at least 2027 at a cost of $225 million a year. Let's bring in our political panel tonight, National Senator Matt Canavan and Sky News commentator Jason Morrison. Welcome to you both.
Hey, Sean.
Matt, look, for a long time, we've been discussing on this program. I've had Matt Keane, the former Energy Minister and Treasurer, on the show arguing that if you got rid of Eraring, there just wouldn't be enough power supply to keep the lights on in New South Wales. The maths just didn't add up. It's quite incredible that it's taken a Labor government to say, yeah, look, we need this energy source.
Well, look, I'm just glad common sense has prevailed, Sharri. There's no doubt that the energy plan that Matt Keane presided over is an utter failure. Our problem is that his close partner in crime, Chris Bowen, is now in charge federally, and Chris is doing federally what Matt did to New South Wales over a number of years. So we're not out of the woods yet, but this arrangement's going to potentially cost taxpayers up to just over $500 million for just 2 years. Just 2 years, over $500 million. I mean, the question's got to be asked here, at what point do we just bite the bullet and build a new coal-fired power station? They last for 50 years. It would only be at a cost of a few billion. So you'd make that back. If it's costing us $200-300 million bucks a year for just one power station, we'd make our money back in less than a decade if we just built another one. And why don't we just do that? We should have done that years ago, but as the old Chinese saying goes, the best time to plant a tree was 20 years ago. The second best time is now. So let's get it done.
Look, Jason Morrison, I remember so clearly during the state election campaign, and Chris Minns was on air with Ben Fordham, and Ben said, are you considering extending the life? And Chris said he was. And I wondered at the time whether this is just, a promise that a leader makes in the run-up to an election. But the fact that he's done it today is saying something about just how desperate and how dire the energy supply is in New South Wales, such
in critical condition. And the report the other day largely confirmed that. I mean, here we have, the collision, if you want, of ideology versus reality. And the collision is we ain't going to have enough power. And Matt's right. I mean, if we are to really approach this from an economic rationalist perspective, the obvious outcome is coal is cheap right now. Coal is very cheap. Coal's 2021 prices again. All this talk about it being really expensive because of Ukraine, that's history. And we have this sort of blind walk into the jungle and hope and pray that the wind's there and the sun shines and that the solar panel supply what we need. It just simply won't work. What we're seeing, I guess, hopefully out of this is the first step of the premiers starting to actually come to the realisation that it's all well and good to talk the Matt Keane, Chris Bowen kind of chitter-chat, but the bottom line is we need reliable base power, and the only reliable base power we have at the moment, right now, including at this very instant that we're on air, is coal. Coal's doing 60, 70%, depending on where you are in the country, even 80 in New South Wales % of the heavy lifting right now. We wouldn't be on without it. Perhaps some people would like that, but that's just a reality.
All right. And look, as you mentioned, the Australian Energy Market Operator warned just this week that New South Wales and Victoria are facing blackouts this summer. So maybe it takes blackouts for people to realise that, the energy mix we've got at the moment isn't going to last. Now, the Nightly is reporting, this is an exclusive by Mark Riley, that the Australian Border Force has actually set fire to dozens of illegal fishing boats. They say that they've seized almost 200 boats and almost 1,000 fishermen and women have been apprehended. This is quite an extraordinary story by Mark Riley, and he's reporting that this was going to be the biggest assault on our territorial waters in almost 2 decades. Matt Canavan, have you ever heard of Australian Border Force doing this before, setting fire to dozens of illegal Indonesian fishing boats that might have come to Australia?
Well, I haven't, Sharri. I don't sit on the particular estimates committees, Senate committees that look into this stuff, so maybe this is not unusual, but it's pretty shocking, and I don't know. I've only just heard this news, so I'm not sure if it's
just
to do
breaking
with
now.
People smuggling or illegal fishing activities. Yeah, so you can go on a marine app. You can go on these apps that look at where boats are, just like the plane tracking apps that most people probably have used. But you can go on a boat tracking app and just go outside of international Australian waters into Papua New Guinean waters, out to the Pacific Ocean, and there are swarms of boats sitting there. Most of them Chinese flagged, just fishing in these areas, and obviously many of them probably do cross into Australian waters at times and do fish illegally, and it's just so ridiculous that we regulate our fishing industry to such an extent that we have to import more than 70% of our seafood. Yet just over the line, the ocean has just fished to all ends. So. It says a lot about our own regulation and how we rely so much on imports and think we pat ourselves on the back, think we're doing something for the environment when the opposite's true.
Jason, what do you think about this story by Mark Riley? And have you ever seen this before? I've never seen it before, setting fire, Australian government, to dozens of illegal fishing boats.
Well, given Mark Riley's got it, I dare say there must be video footage of it as well, being Channel 7's political editor. So if that's the case, good on him. You want to send a message back to Indonesia and back to other nations that want to do this. This is what happens when you head out. These are, organised criminal syndicates that are out there doing it. They might not consider themselves that. And in fact, there's some dimwits in Australia who think they're humanitarian, assistance programs. But this is a real problem for this country, and it's a real problem we have to tackle head on. And if it means getting the people off, arresting them, taking them to wherever they're going to be taken and setting the bones alight and filming them, do it and stick it out online and let the world see it, that Australia is serious about protecting its borders.
All right, let's quickly go to this former detainee who's been charged with murder. Andrew Giles once again fronted the cameras and deflected the blame from himself and his own government. Matt Canavan, this is really, I mean, it just keeps getting worse and worse, but a former detainee charged with murder. I mean, how does Albo get away with not sacking Andrew Giles?
Well, obviously, Andrew Giles is the most protected species of all animals in the country right now. It doesn't seem like he can do anything wrong and continue to keep his job. This is not an isolated incident, of course. There are now dozens of people that have been charged or convicted of crimes that were released by the government after the NZYQ court case. They didn't have to release those people. The court decision didn't say that. They preemptively released nearly 150 detainees, many of whom had either been convicted or charged with crimes before. And, we've got this NZYQ case. I mean, I think we could basically now rename NCIS Sydney NZYQ Sydney, because it would fill a whole season of crime shows, the amount of alleged and convicted crimes that have occurred by these detainees. It's just a
and not just
disaster.
Sydney, it's across the country. And, I know for a fact the Prime Minister prides himself in the fact he hasn't lost any ministers, had to sack any ministers, but I think it just shows his own weakness once again. All right, Matt Canavan, Jason Morrison, thank you very much for your time. Now, after the break, Labor's migration crackdown failure as our universities see a record boom in international students. Leith Van Onselen will join me next. Well, despite Labor's promise to crack down on immigration, the Australian reports today that Australia's universities have recorded a 17% uptick on overseas enrolments compared to last year. And they say this was driven mostly by 100,000 Chinese students. Reports today a record 160,000 international students enrolled at the Group of 8 universities in February. Macro Business Chief Economist Leith Van Onselen joins me now. Leith, look, you've been arguing we need to reduce our immigration levels. So what do you think of this story?
I'm not surprised, Sharri. Look, the blowout in student visas is unfortunately par for the course for the Albanese government. It's consistently underestimated Australia's net overseas migration its whole time it's been in office. So to give you some quick examples, the October 2022 federal budget projected 235,000 net overseas migration for last financial year. Last year's May federal budget then increased that to 400,000. Guess what? It ended up coming in at 530,000, which is more than double Labor's initial projection. Now, the migration circus continued with last year's migration projections for this financial year. So December's MyEFO projected 375,000 net overseas migration this financial year. Last week's federal budget upgraded to 395,000. However, all the indicators suggest it's going to be more like 500,000. So to be quite frank, this is why I don't trust Labor on immigration, Sharri. Just prior to last federal election, they promised that they were going to run a lower migration program than we had pre-pandemic. Instead, they've lifted immigration to record highs and delivered us a rental crisis.
Well, Peter Dutton says that if he were PM, he'd slash migration levels to about 140,000 a year for the first 2 years. You've got 30 seconds. Do you think this is a good idea?
Absolutely a great idea. Look, Australians do not support big Australia immigration. Every single opinion poll, before the pandemic said so, every opinion poll since. I just commend Peter Dutton for finally bringing this in the public domain, and we're going to finally have the debate on immigration that we deserve.
Yeah, and he's very closely tied immigration to the cost of living crisis, to the housing crisis, as you've been arguing. Leith Van Onselen, thank you very much for your time. And thank you for watching this week. If you missed my revelation at the start of the show in Channel 9, head to the Sky News website. It'll also be in the telly tomorrow. I'll see you Monday at 8. And here's Paul Murray.